Keith Hansen. I was born in Knoxville, Iowa. We lived on a farm outside of Pleasantville, which is close to Knoxville. Then we moved down to southern Iowa. We moved there when I was in third grade.
Okay.
So I went third grade through high school there, and then I joined the service when they told me that was in '68 when I graduated high school, and so I joined the Navy Reserve, and that way I wouldn't go to boot camp till after I finished high school. So I joined the Navy Reserve, and I went to boot camp in June in '68. I went to San Diego to boot camp, and then I went to Hospital Corps School, San Diego Naval Hospital. Then I went to Camp Pendleton and got Marine Corps training. Morning after I got to Da Nang, we got there sometime during the day, and the next day they loaded us on C-130s and flew us up to Dong Ha, which is up near the DMZ. People were living in Quonset huts and shelters and stuff like that, and there was they called them sea huts, Southeast Asia huts. There was a sea hut and a bunker and a sea hut and a bunker and a sea hut. So everybody had a place to go when they got rocket attacks and whatever. And then it started soaking in that you were in a combat zone. That and the rocket attacks that we had in Da Nang. That's where I was with 3rd Marine Division. That's where their headquarters was up at Dong Ha. And so I spent the first 2 or 3 months I was in country, Dong Ha and Quang Tri with division headquarters, and then they needed volunteers, as the military always does, and I volunteered to go to recon. If anybody got injured, I was supposed to patch them up and get them sent back to, essentially it was an aid station. But that was my job. But while we were out there, if nobody got injured, my job was to be one of the Marines. I carried a pack, and they handed me a .45 caliber pistol when I got there, and I asked them what I was supposed to throw it at because I wasn't going to hit anything with the pistol. And I said, give me a gun with a lot of bullets. I said, that way I can protect myself and protect my people. And they gave me an M16. So for the year I was over there, I carried a pack and a rifle. I was the medic for the team. I did 4 different teams, 3 or 4, in the year that I was over there. I got in trouble one time because of our cycle. We did. Usually it was a week out and 4, 5, 6 days back, and then a week out and then 4, 5, 6 days back. And I got into that routine, and at that time we didn't have emails and internet or anything like that. So you'd mail a letter home. With my mom, I'd mail a letter home, and she got in the habit of getting a letter but once every week, because I'd write a letter before we left and I'd write a letter when we got back. And so she'd get a letter about once a week. Well, they pulled us out of the bush, and we were moving from Quang Tri to Phu Bai, which is down near Hue City, where they had TED 68. We were at the military base outside of Hue City, and so I was out of the bush for about 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and I was sending a letter like every other day, every third day, and all of a sudden I got called into the major's office, and he jumped all over me like ugly on an ape. And I said, what's all this about? And he said, you haven't been writing your mother. I said, I write her every time I get a chance. And he said, I got a message here from the Red Cross that your mother's contacted the Red Cross about not getting letters from you. I said, can I see the message? And he said, sure. And he handed it to me, and I read it. It wasn't that I wasn't writing my mother. I was writing too often. So she thought I'd been wounded and sent to a hospital somewhere, and that I was laid up, and that's why I had the time to write, is I wasn't in my normal routine, she was getting 2 or 3 letters a week instead of 1 a week, and she thought I was laid up somewhere. And he said, "You're the first person in my history in the Marine Corps." He was a major, and he said, "You're the first person ever that I got a letter on from the Red Cross for writing too often." He said, "I've got a lot of them for people not writing at all, but," he said, "you're the first person ever." The one team got wiped out in the Ashaw Valley. There was 7 of us on the team, and 4 of the guys 3 got killed immediately, and one died 2 days later of his wounds. And the rest of us lucked out, didn't get hit. And we got back, and then that was in the late 60s. I went over there in 69, and they had a thing at that time that the Marines were going to pull out of Vietnam. And we were all ecstatic about that. Well, they did. They pulled 3rd Marine Division out of Vietnam, went back to Okinawa. But the general and some of the staff went to Okinawa, and all of the troops went to 1st Marine Division. And so I stayed in country, and I went from 3rd Force Recon to 1st Recon Battalion, and stayed in country with them. And then I was with Alpha Company 1st Recon Battalion, did patrols with them until I got injured, and I had about a month and a half left in country, and they transferred me to the medical battalion, and I worked, essentially it was hospital duty, and I worked there for the last 2 months I was in country. And then I transferred back to the States. I told them when I came back I wanted anything on the East Coast or east of the East Coast, because I'd never been there. And I got Point Mugu, California, and I figured that was east of the East Coast of Vietnam, so that's probably what they figured. One thing that really bothered me, it bothers me more now than it did then, was coming home from Vietnam. I got a bigger welcome home at Des Moines with my cousins and my mom and their mom and aunt and uncle and cousins and mom and dad and my brothers and their wives and kids, and met me at the Des Moines airport when I got home. And that was my welcome home, because I didn't get one anyplace else. We landed in California and went through customs at Oakland, which wasn't a nice place to be when you were in the service. I immediately put in for hard hat diving school, which was a 6-month-long school. And I went to Washington. That's pretty much what changed my entire life, was going to diving school. Because if I hadn't been a diver, I wouldn't have stayed in the service. And most of the diving that we did for the Navy was no visibility. Everything was by feel. And you didn't know what was around you or where you were or what you were, you knew what you were doing because you could feel what you were doing, but you couldn't see what you were doing a lot of times. But some places you had perfect visibility, 150, 200 feet, and that was great, except that you could see what was there. Yeah, some places you couldn't see your hand. You put your hand in front of your face mask and you couldn't see your hand. And some of that was, it was a blessing in disguise, because you didn't know what else might be in the water with you. But I really enjoyed it. I did, like I said, I did 22 years total service, and I did 20 years as a diver. I was diving one dive in the SRF Subic ship repair facility, Subic Bay, Philippines, and the water is really filthy dirty in the bay there. And I kept telling, I was on surface supplied air and comms. I kept telling them to tell the other diver to quit poking on me. And they said, okay, we'll tell him. And I got back up and I noticed that the other driver was bone dry. Deck around him was dry. He was dry. Everything was dry. And I said, well, who was poking me if he's up here? And they said, turn around and look. And I turned around and looked, and we could see the fins swimming around in the area. And it was a little unnerving. I was on 3 different salvage ships, and our job was to find things that got lost in the water. Airplanes, Navy has a habit, they land airplanes on small ships, and a lot smaller than the airfields that they land on when they're ashore. And you would go to your airfield, or a lot of the airplanes end up in the water because they either fall short or they overrun, and we'd have to go get their airplane back for them. And some airplanes would just crash in the water. We'd have to, and we always joked about it, and just walk around on the bottom, picking up pieces and putting them in the basket, and then they'd take the basket up and send the basket back down, and you'd pick up more pieces and put them in the basket. A lot of the divers, anytime they want to work on the inside of a ship, they have to put a patch on the outside so they don't flood. So divers go down, put the patch on, and then they take the valve off the inside, and when they get the valve rebuilt or replaced, then they take the patch back off the outside. So a lot of the diving is working on ship's hulls and stuff, because it's a lot cheaper and cost effective to put a diver in the water and put a patch on and change a valve than it is to put a ship in a dry dock. And they usually don't dry dock them unless they have to do an extensive hull repair. When I was diving, when I first started diving, I really enjoyed hunting and fishing, and you're hunting for things in the water and fishing and things like that. I really enjoyed it. And by the time I became a master diver, a master diver's job is topside supervisor and running dive stations and that, I had lost interest in being in the water. I'd been in the water too much, and I'd lost interest in it. It's a lot easier to talk about now than it was then, but a lot easier to, I can still remember what the people looked like. My daughter, after my wife passed away, my daughter was cleaning out the house, and it's one of the pictures that I couldn't find to bring along. It was a picture of our team in Fubai, and my daughter found it, and she posted it and said, "Dad, do you remember these guys?" I said, "Yeah, I remember them." And I said, "Yeah, the guy taking the picture was Dan Savage, and the guy on the left is so-and-so, and the guy that," I named everybody that was in the picture. And she said, "I remember you mentioning some of those names." And I said, "Yeah." And she said, how come I would remember those names?" And I said, "Well, you helped me look them up when we were at the Vietnam Memorial in Washington, D.C., and they're all on the wall. The one guy that was in the movie Men of Honor, but when Ragman was, I asked him one time, I said, he gave me his Master Diver pin when I made Master Diver. And I asked him one time, I said, "How do you know when to get out?" He had that much more time in the service than I had. And he said, "Well," he said, it's fun." He said, "You having fun?" I said, "Yeah, I'm still having fun." He said, "When it isn't fun anymore, spell it backwards." Spell it backwards, it's spelled N-U-F. When it isn't fun anymore, it's enough. When I decided to retire in 1990, I was the command master chief on the ship. I was doing a welcome aboard interview with one of the, I called them kids. And I asked him, I was filling out the papers for his welcome aboard, and I asked him his birth date, and his birth date was after I'd joined the service. And that's when I decided it was time for me to get out. So if there's people coming in that were born after I came in the first, I said, it's time. So I took his papers to the ship's office and turned them in and asked for mine. And that's when I retired. I enjoyed the time I did in the service. I enjoyed the travel. That's what I'm doing now. My wife passed away a few years ago, and that's what I do now is travel. So I go visit family and friends, and I'm here and there and all over.